raise your hand. If I see a bunch of hands, I'm gonna step back and you know, take some time to explain things. But you know, I've been in the space for 10 plus years. We've been working on the proof of work, mostly on the Bitcoin side. We're kind of maxis in some ways, if you think about it. We're probably the most maxi altcoin out there, I would say. So it's interesting how we've evolved through the space since the time we began. But you know, I started in a public company. I was a director of a public corp, and I got taken over around 2018. So for about 3-4 years, I spent a lot of time talking to pointy-haired bosses about the infliction of blockchain and Web 2 and Web 3 and how it all matters and how it affects the bottom line, how people are making money with it, or why they should be doing it. We spent some time doing the DID stuff, or ZK DID stuff, which went sort of Canada-wide at some point, so that was pretty cool. And then we sort of incubated the blockchain development going from 2014 to 2019, and then the foundation took off from there from 2019 now. We've been developing sort of in a decentralized way. It's good to see some of the other layer ones, and I need to take notes on how you guys are doing that director thing in Handshake, because it's an interesting concept, because it's hard to organize teams globally, but at the same time you do want to represent that ethos of decentralization in your community as well. But what we're going to talk about today is it's an interesting concept. It's related to, you know, we did get some exposure to BitVM today, but it is related to how to extend the utility of Bitcoin and how do you get more out of just, you know, the UTXO sending and receiving, and what were some of the problems with some of the approaches before, and how do we solve those. Rollux is sort of like a layer 0 in that way. We think we've improved upon the security of what we call light clients, and I'm going to go into why that matters and how it relates to specifically BitVM. You guys should really, you know, we need to dive a little bit deep down into the tech to explain why light client security matters. And then layer 0 means you set up as middleware for Bitcoin programmability across ecosystems. So, for example, if Ethereum or Binance Chain was to use Bitcoin, they would use Rollux as a layer 0 as a middleware to move the Bitcoin or program the Bitcoin to do what you need to do. And all of this is because of the security parameters that we found here. So go step by step, basically why Rollux, why Bitcoin, some of the competition, you know, what's out there, and then some of our designs, and we'll try to go nice and slow so we're capturing most of the attention here, and we make sure we're not losing people on the way. So Bitcoin to us is the capital driver for our economy coming up. With AGI sort of around the corner, it's important that we create systems with security and decentralization in mind. I've heard the term decentralization a couple times. And interestingly enough, there was a white paper by Tim Roughgarden who actually mathematically proved that proof of work actually is more decentralized and permissionless than proof of stake. But proof of stake has more security because you can attribute someone at fault. So if someone's doing something wrong, you can say, look, I found this person doing something wrong, let me slash you. And that would stop that person. And proof of work is permissionless and decentralized. There is no notion of, you know, slashing or anything like that. The worst you could do is you selfish mine some chain, and then you end up getting, you don't get rewarded because you're on a private chain that doesn't get accepted. So putting together the proof of stake and proof of work is sort of interesting, but proof of stake by itself has higher security. And that might sound interesting to some people, like why? But permissionless decentralization we know ends at the end of the day. And if you have a black swan, decentralization matters. That's when it starts to really matter. That's when the security from proof of work starts to go up compared to proof of stake. And there's a natural arbitrage in the market where, you know, upfront the proof of stake blockchain might be more secure, but then when something really bad happens, that's when the proof of work system starts to, you know, survive compared to the proof of stake system. So, you know, Roughgarden highlighted that decentralization matters, and then proof of stake offers that attributable security. And this is interesting because when we've been designing for 10 plus years, we've always had the mind that you need to combine sort of POS and POW, but you still need to give POW sort of the say, like it needs to be POW based with some attribution. And what we came up with was really interesting. we actually realized that for the first time, and you know, it's almost as big as BitVM in my mind, but for the first time, we're able to create security with the majority assumption of Bitcoin, which is, you know, 51% is the majority assumption when I say majority assumption of Bitcoin. And remember, put up your hands if you think you're getting lost. Majority assumption of Bitcoin means if you do something wrong, then most of the Bitcoin miners will kick you off. Like 51%, you have to have majority of the hash rate of Bitcoin to be able to roll back the chain to change the story of what everyone else is seeing. You can't steal assets, but you'll just reorganize the blockchain so it reorders the transactions. That's all you could do. And that's pretty good, but when you're dealing with something like bridging, you don't have the luxury to roll back. Think of blockchains as sort of islands, and all of these systems like BitVM and all these other bridges as sort of like bridges that go into the islands. Now those islands are stable and safe, but once you have a car that crosses from one island to the other, you cannot take it back. You know, once it's on the island, it's on the island. And so a bridge would represent a car going over the island and it can't go back. So even though you may have some sort of proof of work security in your bridge and you say that it's, you know, as secure as Bitcoin, it's only as secure as some sort of, you know, what they say is K deep. So if it's 200 blocks, you have security of 200 blocks of Bitcoin. This is critical because if someone finds a way to roll back Bitcoin 200 blocks, well, that Bitcoin's gone, right? So our realization here is with merge mining, which is what we're doing here, and Antpool merge mines us as well, we basically found a way to have the majority assumption of Bitcoin as a security model. Okay, you start with Bitcoin, and we've additively added our sidechain as a security model. Now, this is usually not possible because typically when you have side chains or you have another chain that's tying into Bitcoin, you either are using Bitcoin directly, so you are 51% secured by Bitcoin, again, that term, honest majority, or you are secured using the side chain. You have side chain security, the honest majority of the side chain. Typically, when you try to do both, you end up at one or the other. What we're noticing in our design is that it's an additive because we have merge mining. When you look at the research literature and around merge mining itself, this goes back to 2012 when Luke Dash Jr. took the cold coin and he actually selfish mined it to try to kill it. He just tried to censor everybody's transactions until everyone gave up. And it was pretty successful. It proved one thing. It proved if you're trying to tie directly into Bitcoin and you're using this concept called merge mining, which borrows the miners and not the consensus, it just borrows everyone's miners so you can mine this other chain for free, you actually don't transfer security. What I mean by that is if you do something wrong, you can't go and slash anybody or you can't hold anyone at fault. Because you can't hold anyone at fault, you actually lose security. So anyone could selfish mine Bitcoin and mine that side chain and do anything on that. It's not actually secure. When you add finality to that mix, which is what we've done, we've added finality, you actually have attribution of security. Because if you have finality and someone is selfishly mining Bitcoin, you know, to try to create some sort of attack on your child chain, then when you hit finality, all of that work gets thrown away. So this is actually a slashing event on Bitcoin, similar to what Babylon's trying to do. You know, Babylon's saying you run a validator, and if you do something wrong, there's a crypto economic system, and you actually slash the validator right on Bitcoin, right? This is similar to that concept, but it's actually the honest majority of Bitcoin plus the honest majority of the sidechain security. So this is an interesting revelation that we're playing with, and the fact that you can get these on another chain, you could then do more. You could do data availability, or you can have roll-ups and all these other things. And the tokenomics of that sidechain could be geared towards utility instead of decentralization and deflate towards zero. You actually open it up and say, let's look at EIP 1559 or what Ethereum did, and start to make the tokenomics more geared towards that, because the gas needs to be abundant. If gas runs out, then what happens? No one can use the system. So if you have abundant gas, it's not Bitcoin itself, but you tying the security in Bitcoin, the tokenomics of that system have a modular design with data availability and all this other stuff. Then you start to see that it potentially could do more than just, it's actually a programmable layer for Bitcoin, and it's bringing more security into Bitcoin itself. Yeah, so the landscape has kind of been changing as we've seen in other previous slides. Like there's a lot of layer 2s come up. There's a lot of roll-ups that start to get launched on Bitcoin. Actually, Citria was just announced a little while ago, and Citria is using BitVM, and they claim to have a ZK roll-up right on Bitcoin, meaning the state is proven, and then you do some smart contracts, and everything's off-chain, but they use blockchain as sort of this court system. And it's interesting because the claim is that you're as secure as Bitcoin, but again, none of that's correct. Even BitVM is not correct in its literature that it's trust minimized. It's actually depending on a light client. When you burn bridge to go over, when you have an island and you have another island, and then you bring the car and you have to bring the car back, that's your Bitcoin. You have to burn that Bitcoin. You have to prove to the Bitcoin blockchain that that second island actually has burnt the Bitcoin, right? That's not the real Bitcoin. That's sort of a wrapped Bitcoin. When you're doing that, you are at the whims of whatever validators are securing that side chain, or if it's Bitcoin itself, then you're at the whim of basically how deep of a reorganized security do you get? Is it 200 blocks, or is it 300 blocks, or is it 400 blocks? Anything beyond that, and that Bitcoin could be stolen. And so we'll go over some of the other like stacks and rootstock and how they sort of solve the problem, but in the end, it's always going to be a light client. You can never have full Bitcoin security on any of these systems. You're always going to be dealing with a light client. So some of the other things you probably want when you're dealing with like a sidechain, when you're dealing with programmability for Bitcoin, in our mind, the great thing about Ethereum was the EVM. The EVM is actually it's a gold standard for every programmable smart contract. So generally, it's well understood. It's secure. It's focused on decentralization and security, and less about parallel or speeding up things like Solana is trying to do. And that is the smartest part about Ethereum, I think, is the EVM. And we're capturing the essence and putting proof of work or Bitcoin security behind it. The other thing is data availability. This is it's solving a specific problem when you're launching rollups and you're moving the CPU off your blockchain into separate CPUs, right? Like typically when you're in one blockchain, there's a CPU, there's RAM, there's memory and disk. Think of it as a computer, right? The disk and memory and CPUs all working together, and it all adds up at the cost. And you see EOS, when Dan Larimer, he broke up the concept of CPU market and memory market and disk market, right? When you're wanting to scale up further, we've found that you have to launch rollups. You're effectively moving the CPU across separate layers. And then the fallback there is you end up having a data availability problem. There's a specific problem Vitalik coined as a fisherman's dilemma. And in order to solve that problem, you have to put the data back in a secure, decentralized, ledger to store it and prove that the world saw the data. And that's the data availability challenge. And actually, in our solution, we took a look at what everyone was doing with sampling and sharding and KZG commitments and all these other crazy schemes that were coming up in the Ethereum space. And we said, if Bitcoin was to have DA, how would it work? And we settled on a hash-based system. So it's actually more aligned with Bitcoin because there's no trusted setup. It's quantum safe. Obviously quantum security matters a lot nowadays, and it's coming up really fast. So having that simplistic view of trust and verify, I can only trust myself using the system. I don't want to trust any other nodes, even if it's sampling. Even if I get like a 99.9% guarantee the data is there, that's not good enough for me. I want a 100% guarantee. When you're using a system like that, you would prefer the DA that we have, that we've analyzed and developed there. And then obviously the fractal scaling aspect is like you could basically build roll-ups on top of these systems and use the data availability that we built to scale this thing up to thousands and thousands or more transactions a second. So like when BitVM came out, it was opening a lot of people's eyes. And I think BitVM 2 just got announced yesterday as well. The challenge with BitVM is, first of all, the literature says it's trust minimized. Nothing's trust minimized. Trust minimized means if you have like 5 people in your system and all of them are adversarial, you only need one honest person for the system to be safe, for the state to be correct. Like if you're moving Bitcoin over and you're storing it in a taproot address, if one of those 5 people are honest, then that Bitcoin is safe. That's what trust minimized means, right? But that's not actually, it's not actually correct. There's a light client assumption on that, which is what I've been trying to say. But the second thing is when you're moving Bitcoin over to another chain, to another side chain, to another system, and you're using something like BitVM, you're actually using a federation that's static. Like if it's 5 people, it's just those 5 people. And you have to trust the 5 people won't collude. If those 5 people just say like, you know, let's just split up the payments ourselves and then we'll hold everyone for ransom, that's totally possible. In order for us to really solve these problems, we have to have permissionless and decentralization in mind, which means, okay. I mean, so that's where I'm getting to. Like, if you have like 5 wallets and only 5 wallets are storing your BitVM address, then those 5 wallets can collude to steal. And what my goal is to say is, if you can have an open and permissionless BitVM where anyone can join that federation, and then only one of those people have to be honest, then the collusion becomes almost negligible to 0. You have that trust minimization property of BitVM. So to solve that problem, what you have to do is you have to have a decentralization list to register for the federation. And that's what we're doing on Rollux, is sort of like an eigen Bitcoin layer. But the eigen Bitcoin layer is just to register the federated list for something like BitVM. So this means people can join, you put your Bitcoin as collateral, you can join that system, you earn ROI on top, and you actually are participating in decentralization instead of just a static list. It's really important that we get that one right. And BitVM 2, Robin was saying that you could basically have anyone challenge that system now. So if you have 5 people in that federation, but there's 5 billion people around listening, any one of the 5 billion people just have to say, put up my hand, like, oh, I think something wrong, I think the state is incorrect. So this is better than what was before for BitVM 1, but still not good enough. And so we're working on solving those challenges. So how does it look like with compared to all these other guys that we're talking about? First of all, Rootstock is one of the early ones. So Sergio DeLarmer, he's a Bitcoin Core developer. The main difference there is they try to tie into Bitcoin, and again, you're still tied with the honest majority assumption of Bitcoin, right? At some point, if Bitcoin rolls back far enough, then rootstock could be captured. But the other thing is you don't have DA or you don't have modularity built in. So if you're going to build rollups on rootstock, first of all, the EVM is not standard EVM. They added some new opcodes, which makes it harder. But second, like, you don't have DA. If you don't have DA, you can't scale up. Right, so this is a major challenge. Stacks is another interesting one. They have a custom VM, and their custom VM runs smart contracts, which is great. But again, they're not using data availability in any way, so they're not modular in nature. And the last thing about Stacks is 70% of Stacks is assumed to be honest. So if 70% of Stacks gets together and says, let's do something bad, and then they could effectively take all the Bitcoin at that point. And then BitVM is actually the stack we want to use. Lightning Networks has a few issues. There's flood and loot, and so it renders, you have to have trust in Lightning Networks to have watchtowers. The flood and loot attack is unsolvable. And then you can't actually have smart contracts because there's no shared state. If there's no consensus, you can't do shared state. Anytime you want to be able to have like a Uniswap, a DEX, where anyone can join, anyone can leave, then you need some sort of blockchain or permissionless consensus in that system. And everything else is basically saying you either are trusting Bitcoin or you're trusting your sidechain. And what we're saying is you can have both. You can have trusting Bitcoin and sidechain together, and that's our claim to fame here. So it's the right time, and we spent 10 years doing this. We spent 10 years developing, researching what the right path should be. We strongly feel Bitcoin is this in the AGI picture, it's global governance. It's representing your stake and what the human race should contribute to when no one has to work anymore and there's no jobs and we could just say, build me this or give me this food or whatever. Bitcoin is the answer for that. But the thing is, the Ethereum ecosystem definitely has the utility, and there's more users right now, and I feel it's more important to push in the direction of Bitcoin as a financial collateralization for systems that will provide adequate security to do more, just like what Ethereum is trying to do, to bring the users back to BTC is the goal. Thank you.